the breakout called Good Jobs versus a Healthy Climate, uncovering the false dilemma. I'm delighted that we're having this. I'm delighted to see you here. My name is Madeline Farah, I'm CCL's Program Director and simply moderating. I want to tell you that I am very excited about this panel. I actually jumped at the opportunity to have a labor union perspective on jobs and climate for CCL, and have the chance to moderate it, and that's because I've seen what an aroused union membership can do. Lots of you know that I'm from Madison, Wisconsin, and that I used to be a teacher before I came on staff for CCL. In fact, in 2011, my union, Madison Teachers Inc., was the first to get out of the classroom and head to the state capitol when our right to collective bargaining was threatened by Governor Scott Walker. So Madison teachers called in sick first in the state and shut the schools down for 3 days. I remember sitting in a restaurant with a dozen teachers from my school after that first evening rally, and we were screwing up our courage to call the principal and say that we weren't coming in. And this was happening all over the city. So none of us had ever done anything like that. On the second day, we were joined by teachers from all over the state. And it looked like a snow day, the way the school closings were scrolling across the street. It was incredible. The weather was cold and nasty, but that wasn't why the schools were closed. The teachers were in the Capitol, 40,000 of them. Outpouring. It wasn't just the teachers. The students joined us, other union members joined us, the firefighters, the police, the service workers, the Teamsters, the electrical workers, every kind of union there was seemed to be out there with us, and the clergy, and the farmers, and people from around the country and around the world. It was like nothing I'd ever dreamed. I'll never forget those days of unity and protest, and even though we did suffer some very bitter defeats. So what I know now is that under the right conditions, even the most unlikely people, like some of my teaching colleagues, will stop talking about the latest episode of Survivor and start banding together to say things that matter to them, like good schools, or perhaps like the planet. So I also know from that experience how smart, powerful, and skilled labor leaders are. And I want labor on my side in any important struggle. So that's why I'm just delighted that you're here. Sometimes over at the Capitol in that huge crowd, I would wonder, will I ever see that many people protesting over climate change? Well, we had the People's Climate March last year, and that was really pretty impressive. And there were a lot of union folks there. So, like I said, I want to be side by side with the unions. So now I'm going to introduce our two panelists. Enough about that. So Joe Uihlein is the founder and executive director of the Labor Network for Sustainability. He's the former secretary-treasurer of the AFL-CIO's Industrial Union Department and former director of the AFL-CIO Center for Strategic Campaigns. He's also a founding board member of CERES, a member of the National Advisory Board of the Union of Concerned Scientists, and served as a senior strategic advisor to the Blue-Green Alliance for 5 years. And then he goes back to the 1990s because he served on the United Nations Commission on Global Warming then also, so I appreciate that longevity. Kim Glass is the executive director of the Blue-Green Alliance, a national partnership of labor unions and environmental organizations. She has served in senior leadership positions in the Obama administration and the U.S. House of Representatives, most recently as the Deputy Assistant Secretary, this is a long title, for Textiles, Consumer Goods, and Materials at the U.S. Department of Commerce. And as the Deputy Chief of Staff and Legislative Director for Congressman Mike Michaud, she led efforts in the House for establishing the House Trade Working Group, a bipartisan organization consisting of members of Congress, staff, labor, environment, and consumer groups. And that served as a key coalition in the House on trade and manufacturing issues. So welcome to both of you. And Michelle, I think you were going to start.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, a pleasure to share the panel with Kim Glass from the Blue-Green Alliance. It's so impressive to see all of you. I really am grateful that you invited me and participate in this particular panel. I'm going to start by saying, one of our primary talking points at the Labor Network for Sustainability is that climate change is the real job killer, not the answers to climate change. And that's really important point to get across when we're talking with labor people, because the dominant theme is that the answers to this problem are threats to us. And there's some reality in that, which we'll talk about. But the real reality is that climate change is the real job killer. So we go at that in two ways. One, we have done studies, state-level studies, on the impact of climate change on work and working people. The reason we do that is that all of the studies I've read about the impact of climate change are big. They're sort of the impact on the planet, the impact on, say, the state of Maryland, and none of them really talk about work and working people. So in order for labor unions and the broader working class to feel a part of this, their needs have to be studied. The impact of this issue on them needs to be studied. So we like to do those kind of reports and studies. And then secondly, we do reports on job creation potential in addressing the challenge that we face with the climate crisis. Last year, in response to a lot of our labor friends complaining to us about the strategy and tactics of the climate movement, and we say, well, those are legitimate complaints, but what's your plan to address the climate crisis? And labor hasn't really had one. They have nibbled around the edges, but not a real plan to address the whole breadth of the problem. So we put out an article, published it, called If Not Now When? A labor movement plan to address the climate crisis, where we lay out our ideas on what a labor movement plan could look like. And we don't think that ours are the only ideas. They may not even be the best ideas, but the idea in putting this forth was to start a conversation. And through that, we can arrive at the best ideas, I believe. Now, similarly, with our friends in the environmental movement who complain about why these union people don't get it, we say, well, there are some real reasons why, but let me ask you, what's your jobs program look like? And I don't know of an environmental organization that has a real jobs program. So this year we're writing one, we're doing a study, and it's intended to be a jobs program for the environmental movement so that they have a climate-friendly jobs creation program so that they have something they can lead with and start to shed their well-earned reputation of being insensitive to the needs of working people. That's their Achilles heel. So I say that to say that we have particular areas of work that address both movements. Now, if you go to our website, you'll see that our tagline, it's our one-sentence mission statement, is making a living on a living planet. That's what we're about. We think that's totally possible, and that's what we're committed to fight for. Both making a living, meaning family supporting jobs, on a living planet, meaning solving the climate crisis and our other sustainability challenges. Now, just transition, we think, has to be a central component in these conversations. And it has to be far more than what we've ever done as a nation in terms of just transition. We've never done it right. We've tried. Kim could talk way more eloquently than I about trade adjustment assistance, but I was at the Industrial Union Department when that program was created. We fought for it, and we were pretty disappointed several years in terms of how it was working. We have on our website a piece that analyzes various different attempts at just transition. What we think is needed is a GI Bill of Rights style program for workers and communities. It has to be both. No worker, no community should be the roadkill on the path to a better future. That should be a basic tenet of public policy, and it isn't right now. It's something we have to fight for. So we include it in just about everything we do. I want to say a word about, I'm not going to talk to you about the science of climate change because you know that. It's why you're here. But I do want to say something about what I call the 2C myth. When I joined the UN Commission on Global Warming at its inception in 1988, our goal was to never allow 2C of warming. That was really bad, and we have to do everything possible to avoid it. Well, if you've just entered the climate space and you read in the public press, 2C sounds acceptable. And that's because we're going to warm the planet by 2C, even if we stop emitting carbon today. So 3 decades of ignoring the problem is going to cause tremendous suffering to hundreds of millions of people and tremendous damage to our planet. So I like to say that whenever I talk, just to get people to get past this sort of, well, let's just not let it go beyond 2C. That to me is unacceptable. We do have to get back to 350 parts per million, as someone said in one of the lunch sessions I was at. Now, the other thing about this is that if every country does what they say they're going to do in Paris, the US and China have reached an accord. Europe has a plan. The Scandinavian countries have a plan. If we all do the best we can do and have great victory in Paris, we still warm the Earth by 3.6 C by 2100. That's failure. So we've got a dynamic here where victory kind of means failure on this issue. That's important to keep in mind because we're going to have to push ourselves after every victory we have. Coming out of Paris, we'll have some victories, I hope. I hope someday we'll pass national climate legislation. It doesn't mean we stop fighting to bring it down to 350. So labor. We say and believe what drives us in our work is that it is in the core self-interest of the American labor movement to step up to the plate on the climate challenge and become a central part of the answer and a central player in the movement to build a sustainable future for the planet and its people. I say that as a lifelong trade unionist. It's why I got myself appointed to the UN Commission on Global Warming in 1988, because I believed then that it was in our core self-interest as a labor movement. Now this means 2 things. It means that we're going to have to adapt to the 2C of warming that we're going to experience. Maybe it'll be more than that, I hope not. And that adaptation is going to create a lot of jobs. That's something that's on the radar screen of the American labor movement. Because there are going to be a lot of construction jobs as we adapt. But we have to be very careful to not allow adaptation to sound like we're solving the problem, because it isn't. We're just adapting to a problem. So mitigation has to be right there in the conversation. Actually, it has to be more important in the conversation, in my estimation, than adaptation. I say that because as you work with unions, you'll run into a lot of them that are excited about adaptation, but not so much about mitigation. So it's important to go into these conversations with full knowledge of the lure that the job creation of adaptation provides, and that's good. It's pulled a lot of unions into the climate conversation while still pushing the envelope on mitigation. And this is a challenge for unions for this reason. The fossil fuel supply chain is one area of the economy where we as a labor movement have density. We have density in the public sector and we have density in some other areas, but the fossil fuel supply chain is one where we have a lot of members. So if you're a labor leader today, the people I hope that you'll be meeting with, you have a legal and a moral responsibility to represent the interests of the people who pay dues to the union today. That's why you find unions that are defending projects that will emit a lot of carbon. That's a real reason. Now, our mission is to help labor evolve beyond the defense of fossil fuels. But we go into it with our eyes wide open and with a firm understanding of the reality of why they do that. And I think you would be well advised to do that as well. There are self-interest angles that I would encourage you to look at and learn and take with you when you go to meet with labor leaders. If you go to our website, you'll see something called a labor landscape analysis. It's a major study of the American labor movement where we analyze the self-interest of 42 labor organizations, who they represent, what they stand to gain or lose in this climate fight. And you'll find a briefing paper for activists. So you can go to any of those unions and read a profile of the union before you go and have your meeting. There's also a briefing paper for activists where we offer talking points. If you're going to meet with a union in the public sector, here's some things you can focus on. Primary among them, in my opinion, is the impact of climate change on state, local, and federal budgets. The very source of a public sector union's bargaining power is healthy public budgets. Those are going to be decimated by climate change. They already are being decimated, and that's going to get worse and worse. So they have a real strong self-interest reason. In the construction trades, beyond adaptation, which we've talked about, every small increase in temperatures means a decrease in productivity. It means more heat stroke, less working hours, because they do shut construction jobs down when temperatures get above 95. And every time that happens, that's less hours worked, and that means less credits that go into their health plan and their pension plan. So here's climate change posing a real threat to the health plans, pension plans, hourly earnings, and the health of construction workers. Public health in general is a good talking point for any union, because all the members